Awesome. Well, without further ado, I would like to invite up the first speaker of the Affirming Day.
Do you want to do this?
No, I think I've got it over down. Alright, as the first speaker, I'm going to show you how on the F side of the house we're going to contribute to a better world where the next generation has a clear understanding, a clear optimism, and actually have good critical thinking skills too. So first, for the entirety of our case, we're going to prove that the Disney model thing, it produces a better effect on children. A nice balance of optimism and realism, and not overwhelming them with ideas that are beyond their grasp. So I'd like to first do some characterization and kind of our model of what's happening in this debate, and then move on to our two main points. The first one, that Disney optimism is the better way to go, and the second one, that Ghibli optimism is just not effective. So I'd like to start off by characterizing children. So children are fairly easily influenced and affected by what they see, what they hear, what comes to them. And in terms of their purpose for consuming this media, like books, TV shows, films, it's entertainment mainly, but it's also learning about the world around them, the world outside of their parents, their home, the park, the supermarket, the world as a wider place. And so often unknowingly they're learning and taking in all this stuff. They lack critical thinking skills. They don't think something through once they've watched it. They take it in. And they also lack preconceived morals. They don't often, especially at a young age, they don't come into something with they don't come into life with a full understanding of what's right and what's wrong. It gets taught to them by their parents, but also, as we'll explain later, by this media. And this media, they're being shown on a regular basis. Often every day, parents will turn it on for them, or very regularly, especially in the Western world. They also tend to see things fairly black and white. Oh, this is right, this is wrong, this is what happened, this is what didn't happen, because they haven't developed that part of their brain for thinking in between yet. And yeah, they perceive things how they're given to them. Children's media, as I've already said, books, films and shows, it's a very big industry on a global scale, makes big profits, and people who produce it are keen to keep it this way, because that's their form of income, and most people are very happy when they get money. They're going to make money by pleasing the consumers, and the consumers being the people who buy things, the people who buy this being the parents who buy it for their kids. And they understand that many children do view this content. Now, something which is going to be very crucial in this debate is what actually good versus evil is. What is the good versus evil that the Disney optimism is pushing? And we believe that the right way to characterise this is looking at the outcomes for everyone involved and noting that they're fair, just and good. And not only the outcome of the overall situation, but all the outcomes, and that's how we know whether something is good or evil. And so basically in the Disney optimism model, like the info slide said, clear good and evil, and good always triumphs. It avoids grey areas as a thing. Something which is a contentious issue the world's not quite agreed on, it avoids that. It more goes into what is generally, or what is black and white, good and evil.
One.
No. And it often features around dispute with a good side and a bad side. And also the Disney optimism model, as we note, is more prevalent in the world right now. The Ghibli optimism model, moral relativism, ending in a peaceful compromise rather than a clear-cut victory. It's philosophically abstract thought in terms of questioning morals, no decided victory, non-tangible ideas that are lost on children. Children who don't think about this, they're not not critically thinking, and it just confuses them. So it's less likely to be successful in the industry, which I'll go on to later. So moving on to basically our main point of the case, that Disney optimism works better all round. So it's better for children's development. Children need to be taught right and wrong, because right and wrong is a fundamental part of who you are. So long as you understand good versus evil, then you'll make decisions which are based on that, and your decisions are an important part of what happens to you, how you attack things, your situation. And so if children are being shown this, they're going to shown this good and evil, they're going to take it in, and that's going to be become part of them, because they learn through what they're shown. And what they're shown is this media. This media, it shows clear morals. Also, it encourages constant optimism and resilience. The typical characteristic of things under the Disney model is that it looks like they're going to give up, but they're going to make it to the other side. And this is something else which we believe children are going to take in and put into use in their life. And also, finally, it'll show them that in a good society, good should always win. Not only this, but Disney optimism, it sells better, because the consumers, their parents who grew up on optimism, and they prefer what they know. People are more likely to buy something or watch it if it is something that they are used to. So, especially for children, when they've got their children's entertainment in mind, the parents are more likely to buy something under the Disney model or Disney optimism. They won't buy stuff if they don't agree with it or they're concerned about their kids watching it. And if the kids struggle to understand it, they'll see it as something pointless to buy. And if they find that it's helpful for their kids to look at, they're also going to be more likely to buy it. I'll take a point now if you have one.
Right. In a world where good and bad isn't actually defined by certain moral rules, why is it that you think by pushing a certain idea of what it truly looks like beneficial to children?
Well, because I think this model, it focuses on what is clearly right or wrong in our society, and it avoids the grey areas. The grey areas are what's more covered by the Ghibli model, and we believe that for children it's more appropriate they be shown the Disney optimism model. And so while it doesn't, contentious issues, it won't teach them what's wrong or right, but the basic things, stealing, lying, this is going to be an important part of their development. Okay, so I'd just like to also touch on the fact, my second speaker will go further into this, that Ghibli optimism, it doesn't work. It's not really designed for kids to watch. We believe that Ghibli optimism is good, it does have its place, we should be questioning things, but when we're actually physically able to question things, when we're youth, teenagers, when we're older, this is an amazing concept, just not in children's media. It can be almost disturbing to them, confusing their worldview. They can misconceive it and get the wrong idea. And also, as my second speaker will touch on later, it sells worse. And so, in conclusion, we'd like to state that the Disney optimism model in children's media is definitely preferable.
I thank the speaker for their speech and would like to invite up the first speaker of the negating team.
affirming's argument of whether people will buy these movies in the first place or buy Disney stuff or buy Ghibli stuff in the first place is not important in this debate when these companies already make a huge amount of money. I think we should be focusing on the harms that it has on the children and how they go about in this world. Firstly, on setup and what the two worlds look like, then why Disney optimism creates harmful stereotypes. Secondly, on why we allow for better understandings of the world for the children. And thirdly, on why kids are more likely to do good actions. Okay, firstly on setup then. Why do kids believe what they see in the media? I think they cover this, but I think I'll go over that. The fact that they spend a lot of time, they're very impressionable. And so what do these two worlds look like, right? The Disney optimism world looks like having a hero and a villain, which the hero always wins and the villain either dies or suffers forever, right? This looks like the Lion King. And secondly, in Ghibli optimism, it looks like having a more reality-like story where there is no definitive hero or villain. When they gave us a characterization that it's not clear who wins in this trope, I think logically, because they want it to sell, they'll make it so there is a winner, right? Because people like to see that, but we tell you that it's not like the distinctive good person that is winning on this side of the house. So it is morally subjective. Okay. Firstly, on why Disney optimism creates these harmful stereotypes. The context of this is that in most Disney children's movies, these villain characters are either dressed in dark colors or are of ethnic descent, and they have this white savior hero, right? For example, in Pocahontas, where John Smith saves her from her miserable life in the Native American village. We tell you that firstly, Disney is a very old media company where these old stories are reintroduced in cartoon or live action forms in which they bring back these traditional narratives. Secondly, Disney is widely renowned as a very racist company, right? They treat their ethnic workers worse by reducing their pay and mistreating them in the workplace. B, they use ethnic stories and turn them into the bad end of the story instead of celebrating the fact they have some independence. How then do they create these bad stereotypes and put these onto the children? Firstly, did we tell you that when a child sees in Disney films that a dark-skinned Jafar or Ursula do objectively bad things like killing a girl's dad, the kid now believes or at least associates that image with negative things because by then a kid knows that killing someone else is bad. They know it's bad, now they put it onto this certain image that they see. Secondly, it is a narrative that is used a lot in Disney optimism, so the kid watches these repetitively, either by A, watching this movie over and over because they enjoy it, or secondly, they just watch similar storylines because Disney is popular, right? This is because Disney creates stories with a lot of similar storylines because of the nature of optimism that is limited because there is only one good and one wrong. Secondly, because they make so much money from these storylines, they have no incentive to change them from the traditional narratives because people want to see Snow White again. They want to see what good and bad people look like. Thirdly, it could feed into the existing stereotypes socially or that their parents and it reaffirms their ideas. Comparatively, in Ghibli optimism, when they see these stereotypes in real life or are fed them by their parents and see a different depiction on the screen or something that is slightly different or very different, it looks like two people of different race both doing good and bad things, where they can no longer feed into the villain being the one that is the objectively horrible person. The outcomes of this is that one, we get less stereotypes being exacerbated in mass media. We heard about young kids being very impressionable. The fact that they probably haven't come across a diverse group of people because their friends are probably their family's probably friends with a certain group or similar ethnicity because of their family tree. We think that this makes them so impressionable to these stereotypes. But even if you think that these kids aren't swayed a lot by these stereotypes, the difference comes when a kid just says something harmful to another kid because they've been fed these ideas, right? It's like telling them to play the bad guy in a play, or when they're doing a group little play activity, or it's treating them or believing that they have bad intentions and not wanting to be friends with them. The impact of this is very harmful because these racial and gender stereotypes get passed down to younger generations on a very large scale, ethnic children being diminished when their reputation. The second impact is that ethnic children feel diminished when they feel misrepresented or portrayed as a horrible person, and also you have the same with gender stereotypes. When Cinderella in Cinderella, when the prince is portrayed as the male savior, which young girls believe they need help, and this disempowers the kid and catalyzes on these very harmful traditional stereotypes. They told us then about how children need to be taught right and wrong. This moves on to my second point, in which in the real world there is no right and wrong, right? We know that the world is morally subjective. This is why we have things like philosophy. I think that it's good that the kids have an understanding of the fact that they have like certain good things that they do can harm other people, so it's not always just one good thing. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Do you not acknowledge that the racist and or any other negative elements of those films have changed to reflect the views of the society at large over time, as seen in like variation in between how the Disney films have represented different races?
We
over
think
time?
the most famous films are the traditional ones in which they recreate these stories because they have no incentive to change them. But even if we buy this material that they have changed to involve these stereotypes, I think there was a lot of backlash for these movies because they still mistreated the people. They didn't protect them from the racist remarks from the rest of the public. Okay, secondly, why we allow for better understanding of the world. Firstly, Disney optimism does not reflect the real world, and I think this is obvious because because there's always a story behind someone's intention. Disney only portrays the intentions of the good person and not the bad, right? And B, Disney shows the bad one having to suffer for eternity because they made one big mistake. I don't think this is true in the most majority. It's not like a kid is now going to kill someone. It's like them doing something bad and now feeling like they have to suffer, or like feeling that they did something really wrong, instead of moving on from those mistakes and learning as a benefit they're trying to prove. Okay, firstly, we tell you that kids can see a wide range of actions and the impacts. Comparatively, they only get some actions and are obviously portrayed as good and bad. This means that in their everyday life, the associations they make can apply to different actions that they saw. Secondly, kids are too young, so they don't understand or are inaccurate in knowing the situational context. So when they see someone on TV, for example, disobeying their teacher because the teacher is being mean or they're like the bad character in that movie, then they might go into their classroom context in which something they perceive is bad that the teacher is doing, such as making them do math homework. They might act out or feel like the teacher is now the bad character. Thirdly, because it's a less definitive trope, there are far more types of stories that are told. They can see more situations, they can see more perspectives and actions that prepare them for the world. Fourthly, it's because they are not told what is right and wrong explicitly. They can come to their own conclusions. When they tell us that kids have no critical thinking skills, I think because of the fact you're human, you can begin to distinguish what you think is right and what you think is wrong. When you're presented with different sides and when you're able to see the negative consequences like a good action might actually have on someone, then you can actually find for yourself what you think is good and bad. And we think they just know the consequences of certain actions or how they can benefit other people. Fifthly, the teacher it teaches them about to compromise, right? And that it doesn't have to be a winner a hero and a loser a villain. That in these situations you can come to a middle ground that benefits both parties. The outcome of this is that side affirming puts good and bad into boxes and doesn't allow for independency, right? They have more inaccurate depictions on life. The impact is that kids base their foundation partly on what they see on TV. It's more likely to take in the viewpoint into account and making judgments and making actions that are very objective.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I would like to invite up the second speaker of the affirming day.
A 2-year-old can't even tie their shoes, so how are they meant to distinguish these complex moral qualms that the negating side is tempting to push? Okay, let's just go straight into rebuttal here. The argument that students and teachers have this kind of moral difference doesn't really make sense, because kids are justified in disobeying a teacher if their teacher is, say, doing something wrong. And where do you distinguish right and wrong? Disney is the optimism model. It is teaching these students about key life lessons that they need to learn. So, In today's second speech and the whole debate as a topic, this debate hinges solely on finding the right balance between optimism to inspire our youth and realism to prepare them for the real world. Now, I would like it known, we as the affirming side never stated that that the other model of optimism is a bad thing for like adults. This isn't what today's debate is about. Today's debate is solely about whether the Disney model is effective for the youth of tomorrow or for the children of today. Our current children of today need to kind of learn this sort of thing. I also kind of want to touch on the fact that they talked about Disney as being a huge kind of multi-billion-dollar corporation. Yeah, of course they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But why are they a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Billion? Yeah, we'll go with billion. Why are they a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Simply put, it's because of audience expectations. Over time, they've built up this key audience. They've built up this key audience with regards to that. As a media student, you're constantly taught regards of audience and consumer media expectations in the global media landscape, right? And when audiences go to watch a film, they need to understand key certain things with regards to what they're seeing on the screen, right? So when you go to watch a film, when you go to engage with a book, when you go to engage with some sort of children's media text, you expect to see something, right? You expect to see this kind of good versus evil kind of qualm. You expect to see key character archetypes. You expect to see kind of like key conflicts of interest, right? But why? Now, I'm sure the negating side will try and argue that we should try and flip this, but realistically, let's look almost to the start of time, right? Realistically, in the start of time, we've had these huge eras where it's constantly been this fight between good versus evil. This is not just in even children's media. Like, you go back, it's like you have the knights and you have the bad army, right? It's always this kind of conflict of interest. It's been like that since the early 1600s, right? And since you go on and like, but why is it like that? It's because the media has pushed this kind of preconception towards that, and that's why it's so key. Right? Now here, right, coming back to audience expectations, it is a benefit only unique to our side of the house. And like, that is why that point there is key and stands on our side. I kind of just also want to talk about like the social learning theory and kind of like how that really keenly intertwines in today's debate. Like, we learn through what we are shown on the media, right? So as a youth, you are shown, and this definitely comes with the negating side's kind of argument here, is that you are shown what you see, right? So say you're sitting down at home as a 5-year-old, right? And you see a good princess getting saved by a charming knight, as an example, right? It's this kind of reality of seeing. You might see that as a preconception idea, and that's pushed out in the world. But it's kind of, you've got to really flip that and look at how deep and morally correct that is, which in our case is correct for children's media, right? Also, the children's media is a... Yeah, I'll take the point.
What is morally correct about a white man saving a woman who is supposedly in distress?
Let's try and flip that as well. It can be morally correct in any eyes. You guys tried to argue that there is no moral, like the whole morality of this whole argument, which I feel like this argument is going to be a huge clash point of like who can prove the correct morals, and that's kind of what it is about, right? Let's look at this, right? It's nothing, we're not saying anything is wrong between this person getting saved by this. Say you flip that and it was a woman saving a male. Are we now instantly saying that it's not like that? Like realistically, you can't try and flip it and put it that it's just these overall like feminist and kind of like masculine kind of archetypes. You can't try and flip that and try and like be all like, you literally can't look at it from that kind of perspective, right? Because say it was in the media, which we have seen in current media types, where you see this kind of like, you might see in today's media landscape this kind of like feminism idea, which is really good and key to teach our youth of tomorrow, and we never argue anything against that point.
Point?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Wouldn't Ghibli productions also have the incentive to appeal to the mass media, in which these really subjective things that you claim are actually going to be digestible situations for these children?
Digestible, I quite like that word there. For our youth of tomorrow, the youth can't understand what is being sent towards them. As a 5-year-old, they might understand what is being sent in like moral out in like the scheme of things, but realistically, they can't understand this kind of like, they can't truly swallow, as you could say, that kind of meaty sort of substance with your argument there. I also kind of want to like touch on gritty realism, which our first speaker, Natalie, clearly pointed out, right? Like this kind of realistic idea that the world is all negative, right? How can you get this sort of sense of optimism in a youth? How can you be inspired if you're not like taught these sort of ideas, right? Like if you're constantly being absolutely bombarded by this sort of thing that the world is a negative place, and the world, no one in the world can like defeat these sort of evil powers, because let's be honest, there are always going to be evil powers in the world, whether you try and spin it as a good versus evil, right? Like if we look at pretty much every sort of type, there is a good versus evil kind of power balance in this sort of thing, and you can't argue that there is always going to be peace. Like you can't try and convince us that that peace will always be able to come with this sort of this miscarriage of justice. We literally have to look at these kind of key values over time with regards to this, and the fact that this kind of gritty realism is why youth are like kind of understanding this. Like, you're not going to show them like civilian like bombing, and you're not going to show students like this kind of like qualm kind of issue with regards to like, you're not going to show them the kind of harsh realities of World War II and the absolute destructive things that happened during the Holocaust. You're not going to show them that, because at the end of the day, a 5-year-old is not going to be able to truly digest that sort of information. That is why we have G ratings, PG ratings, M ratings, R16 ratings, because it's not appropriate to show a minor the sort of like harsh realities that you guys are trying to talk about, right? Like, also, there is also, coming back to their point with regards to interracial problems in Pocahontas, right? Like, there are nuances in Disney's, like, optimism model, right? Like, stories have evolved over time, and it's not this constant power of, like, good versus evil. It's actually this constant flip in the side of thing where it's, you know, this nuance and, like, the deeper issues, right? Like, if you look at Frozen for a little example here, where Anna and Elsa kind of going out and she's trying to defeat sort of Elsa as the evil power in this sort of instance, right? There's also lots of other things going on here. The youth are learning about kind of key love stories, and it's not these conventional love stories, right? Like, we're not saying that just because a male and a female are in a relationship, like, that has nothing to do with it in this sort of argument, as I feel like that's going to be a point they're going to try and swing on us. We're definitely arguing that this kind of, we can develop, and Disney has moved on in its court of public opinion, right? Like, Disney have been able to develop, they've got these interracial couples now. Now, some would argue that they're just kind of throwing them in for diversity, which, let's be honest here, it's not actually the case. They're trying to move on as a progressive, like, because as a society, we're starting to see these sort of more progressive values kind of come through in what used to be a very conservative media landscape with kind of like these big corporations being owned by like a couple of people, and we're kind of starting to see this whole diversification, like looking to a broader like sort of instance with regards to this. Also, coming back to like a key point that Natalie really reinforced was the fact that children like kind of don't have these sort of morals in their mind at this sort of stage. Like, sure, with regards to the social learning theory, they're learning what's coming through them and like coming out at them, but realistically they're not able to digest this sort of information. So how can you argue that they are able to learn about these complex moral qualms when in reality they simply do not understand? Right? Coming back to this sort of like hero's journey concept that they tried to talk about, right? And it's kind of this narrative arc, like where there's always a good power versus an evil power. That's always going to exist regardless of whether you change the motion or not, right? So realistically, the debate is resting on this kind of optimism versus realism, and we've clearly pointed out why optimism and realism are so closely together and need to be looked at in children's media. Very proud to stand. Thank you.
Cool. I thank the speaker for the speech, and I would like to invite up the second speaker of the negating team.
Oh, this is a scary one.
Yeah, sure.
The negating side of the house the affirming side of the house fails to understand that Ghibli production studios are also a children movie production studios. So it is likely then that they likely want to be gathering in an audience and making their content digestible for children. When a child grows up to only be seeing certain Disney stereotypes being pushed on them from a very young age, of which they are very impressionable, having stereotypes pushed on them, having very certain narratives of what good versus evil looks like, it's entirely harmful to them because it is not reflective of the real world, and they can never progress as a person, which is the core reason as to why they watch these things in the first place. Okay. Three main things in my speech today. Firstly, on which side teaches children about the world better. Secondly, on the Disney stereotypes points, which was majorly unresponded to. And then finally, why on our side of the house, we see that parenting is just so much easier. Okay. Firstly, on which side teaches children better. Now, this is something that was largely discussed in the debate, where they told us that Disney is just better because the children, they have to learn what good versus evil looks like. Now, why then does Disney not actually teach children what good versus evil looks like? Disney doesn't teach it in the way that they have very specific narratives of what this looks like. They agree with us from the very beginning that children watch this stuff to learn. So when they open up television and see that a very specific narrative of what good versus evil looks like, they will never actually learn to develop the critical thinking skills
Yeah,
that makes
why?
them see what the world looks like. They agree that like Disney avoids gray area and focuses purely on the black and white. So on their side of the house, they want the children to consistently exist in the black and white. On our side of the house, we show them there is a spectrum of what is right and what is wrong. We tell them that there is more than one thing that they could be seeing, right? And we can tell them that there is always reasons and intentions behind things. So on our side of the house, we see that children learn more about what good actions actually are, for the reasons that firstly, they can see a variety of what good actually is. They can see that someone doing something that may look good on the outside might not entirely be good, because good is like an idea that is not entirely true, or like someone does something that's like one mistake. This could actually be something that's like beneficial. But on our side of the house, we encourage discussions where you can see a variety of things that are good or bad. We also, on our side of the house, we also show children that good does not necessarily have to be a massive life-changing thing, like saving someone's life, right? Through Disney, we constantly see that to be good, you have to save the kingdom or save the princess, and just always ideas that good is only something that is ultimately life-changing and like world tilting. On our side of the house, when we show them that there's like good can be seen on a smaller scale, where you can actually just be a good person, and that moral ambiguity is actually something there's like just spectrum of what good really is, we can see that children know what it like. We can see on our side of the house, we encourage them to do more good actions on a smaller scale, because that is what is being told to them. We also finally see that what is portrayed in their world, it's like really important that these children can actually feel like they are doing good things in the first place, so they don't do one mistake as a kid and then automatically label themselves as a bad person and just end up falling down through that trap. Everything we hear on their side of the house just relies on the idea that good and bad in the real world is a very set thing, and it will never ever change. There will always be a good person, always a bad person. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
How can you have a discussion with a 5-year-old or like a 2-year-old about morality when they simply cannot process this information?
So Ghibli Studios is actually a studio that is made for children, right? They have an incentive to be catering for children. So Disney is all like a large corporation because they're targeting children and pushing these ideas on children, because they're like on their side of the house, they're saying it's making it digestible. However, we see that exact same thing on our side of the house because their audience is children. So they have to be showing the kids, well, like they have to be explaining things to the children. If you make it so that it's completely abstract, completely like something that's ununderstandable, you then don't make it a children's thing, right? It is like, as seen in the motion, it is a children's trope. So it is already made for children. It is made in a way that is digestible. But on our side of the house, we just show them that morality is something that is a lot more complex. We're not teaching them like the Marxist theory, right? On our side of the house, we're actually teaching them like a variety of what good is. We're not teaching them every single social construct that ever existed. I do not understand why they think we're teaching a 2-year-old philosophy. We're just simply teaching them what good really might actually look like and the scales of which this can truly be happening. I'll take another point if you
When you refer to Ghibli optimism, can you name like any sort of like films or media texts that have used this as an example, as it seems you guys are lacking that in your argument?
You guys have not given us any examples as to why Disney is good. However, we can name one example. Like we see in like movies like Spirited Away, for example. But we can't have actual examples. They cannot win this debate on examples, right? Examples are just simply unnecessary to prove that we show moral ambiguity. We see in the motion itself there is a variety. Just because we can't list exact reasons doesn't mean like this point just does not stand at all. Okay. Moving on to Disney stereotypes and things that we pushed. So Katie outlined very clearly that Disney is a largely racist corporation where they're consistently pushing out ideas of various like specific things. Not only are they racist, they also push like gender stereotypes, age stereotypes, where there's always the old hag or the evil stepmother or the evil brown person or the white savior man who will come save the princess who has nothing better to do with her life than sit in a castle and look pretty. When we see it on our side of the house, we see that there's a more variety. Like Disney just consistently pushes stereotypes. And since children are so impressionable, if we take that children only understand the very basics of things and don't have critical thinking abilities, they will take these things on surface level and just pick up all the negative harms. And then we will see this reflect on their lives, where they go tell children in schools like these same stereotypes they've been learning and just overall grow up to be absolutely horrible people because they've had these stereotypes pushed on them consistently with no resistance whatsoever, because there is no alternative. The only response we hear from this is that Disney is slowly bringing in more interracial couples, right? This simply just isn't enough to take down years and years of systematic issues within Disney's system, where they consistently have this idea where they take traditional stories with actual things and they just don't be remaking it. We always see them remaking old stories with no additions, with diversity hires to make it seem better, but still there is the underlying message, which was always the stereotypes that exist in media narratives in Disney. Okay. Finally then, on why we get easier parenting on our side of the house. Now, we already told you that when Disney media optimism is the norm, it is extremely hard then for children to develop any critical thinking skills, because they consume the ideas where the only way to be like the only way to win is to completely defeat the other opinion and the other person, and like good only looks a certain way, and there is no variety. This then leads to the parents having to suffer through to teach their children about things like compromise, where Disney says the only way to win, to get what you want, is to absolutely destroy your opponents. They then have to teach children that Disney is not in fact the real world, and where Ghibli productions are just so much more reflective. So parents have a lot less pushback when they tell their children what good actions look like, and they can use examples from these things. When we have it so that Disney is the only thing that they're using, parents have to see their children consuming the idea of like a pretty princess and a savior prince, but then they have to tell them that's not actually what the real world looks like, which is overall extremely hard for parents to then go and teach them. We also see that on our side of the house, we can have parents using examples from their children's favorite Ghibli movies to teach them about the world. This cannot happen with Disney because it's simply just not reflective of the real world, and just teach children's delusions about what the real world looks like. The impacts of this then are that we have younger children with more societal awareness, since the parents can now discuss with them certain topics which show that good looks like more than one thing. We also see that parents are able to encourage their children into discussions where they can actually think critically about someone's intentions. On their side of the house, they agree that children have no critical thinking skills. We are the side that promotes that. We also finally see that parents have a peace of mind when they show their children when they know that their children are watching something that's actually reflective and actually teaches them something, rather than like in the real world, rather than consuming nonsense solutions. Since we are the side that actually teaches children about the real world and dismantle negative stereotypes that truly affect like the preschool playground, we are the side that wins the debate.
Alright, I thank the speaker for that speech. I'd just like to remind everyone that we would generally expect that there to be a 15-second separation between asking POIs. And with that, I would like to invite the third speaker of the affirming team to the floor.
Sorry, I just got a whole load of paper to get through, so take a wee moment once you've got it. But right, thanks for your understanding, folks. Swap that. Alrighty, and Right. The opposing team envisions a world with a level of moral complexity that, in my perception, is akin to teaching the concept of the principles of nuclear physics to children, where we can explore where these benefits, where the concept of this may be a beneficial concept to humanity in a metaphysical, theoretical world which they have imposed, yet we believe we have shown you a practical alternative where this has no place in actual reality, simply one because of the characterisation which we have clearly framed, which has had no response on the characterisation of children, and both the characterisation of the children's media market, which I'll just reiterate throughout my speech, which we've reiterated throughout this case, which has had no clear response. Firstly, I would like to divulge onto the two main clash points of this debate and how they are integral to our paths of victory, which explain how we are victorious in this argument. I'd first like to direct just on some points of rebuttal that centre around the clash points here today. We've heard a lot about the social implications that Disney media companies have had. We've not heard much. We've heard about Ghibli Studios as somehow, because it's a children's, simply without any mechanism, just simply because it's a children's media company, it is able to somehow communicate these metaphysical principles, such as the likes that you would read in something like the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophical Principles, or something like Friedrich Nietzsche's text Beyond Good and Evil. These are highly advanced philosophical concepts. I mean, I was only really introduced, I read some bits of the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy at 13, but most people, these are not commonly introduced concepts at a young age. No, thank you. So these we see on this side of the house that while they explore this, we see why do you believe that the Disney model has been so significant throughout the years is because it's captivated on the social audience expectations of what is relied on children's media, even if that does not affect an outcome using historiography that we do not judge as historically desirable today. We look at why they say the model of the white saviour in the example of the film Pocahontas, which has been deliberately detailed throughout the case. Why is this not applicable? I'll take that point of information briefly.
Why is it that children are going to be struggling to comprehend concepts that simply explain that there is more than one way to look at something that is good or bad?
You can explain that as a vague idea, but it's still a very vague concept to introduce, and it's very hard to contextualise that, and we've heard no method of how this is able to be contextualised from NEG, apart from the fact that it will be simply because this is a children's media, this operates in a children's media industry company with no idea of the succession that Disney has had. I might to reflect on stereotypes are really an integral part of media corporations, even if they cannot be avoided, whether they are positive or negative attributes, simply because that reflects the way society perceives the world, which ties into audience expectations, which then ties into the operation of a large media industry and how these internal companies have operated. Where our characterisation strongly matches with why Disney has been integrally so successful as a large business in this market for years, simply because it captivates towards the clear-cut, simple messaging, no thank you, dictated to children through their romanticisation of old European fairy tales and through the simplification of ideas which is prevalent to children. They've acted like children are being sat down. All children perceive as the idea of ideas presented in these films. They ignore the idea of parental, societal, social expectation. They ignore that children may go back on these as an adult and think, yes, and look back on the simple principles of these as an adult, as a scholar, and that the parents may need to explain these. They may need to reflect how parents might perceive these. The parent might explain, well, this is said in the film, but this is how it affects our worldview, or this is how it affects us as a family. They ignore these fundamental societal concepts which are arranged in the idea that it takes more than just one concept. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes more. There are a number of fundamental concepts which we've explained through the use of social learning theory, whereby media constructs shown to people are adapted to what they are saying. Number of benefits they've said of these types of critical thinking leading in these ideas fail to, one, be realistic. We see the realism of this fails for a number of mechanisms. We see it through the central concepts of the analysation of media studies and children's media. They've failed to analyse this through the children's media market. They've acknowledged this at a scholarly perspective. This is great for the 33-year-old master's philosophy student, but this is not great for the average 5-year-old boy or girl in like a general area. Or even on a global scale, we see why does this occur? Why is it not a realistic change which they've exposed? It might be great hypothetically, but why is it not realistic? We see it's not realistic. One, we see the audience parents expect from a general perspective clear-cut and simple messaging understandable to their children. They want something that the children can, one, enjoy, and two, be entertained from. At the end of the day, the children, no thank you, the children are more easily influenced, say something in the movie Cars, not about how the concept of friendship is learned, but more about the cars racing down the road at the fastest speed. Be entertained by these fantastical principles revealed in this, which while this may remain consistent through these films, they fail to acknowledge the idea, the simplicity of this good and evil concept reflects so well of children's psyche that if we remove this in their model, this will potentially lower viewership, as children and parents will be less entertained from this as the expectation lowers, which will lower sales volume and lower consumer demand for these products, which lowers the financial profitability, and we see the least viability for firms, even such as the Ghibli studios. It may be a great theoretical concept in an ivy-coated tower, but I tell you, here today, it will have no success in actual and the cut-and-throat consumer markets that we have shown in practical examples. It will not succeed. Why do we show this? We've shown to you through this mechanism of sales and viability. It won't be financially viable to produce this. So, and actually, an ambient in a capital, or even like in any type of market structure, yes, I'll take one point of information.
So for the sake of the media industry, you are willing to push racist, ageist, gender-like stereotypes?
When have I said this will be ageist? And this adapts to the point of why we believe we won the point of stereotypes. I've said the integral, and they've said the media companies reflect society. We see Disney now is trying to diversify old classical films, which such as like The Lion King, not just by integrating these types. We see Disney now making films where they feature like predominantly sometimes gay, as a mixed, like as a challenge, like the typical heterosexual normality and what they past produced. We've seen like the wide array of cultures. We've seen the representation of Pacifica cultures in Moana. We've seen Chinese and like Asian cultures in Mulan. We've seen the representations of these in live action, but also in animated film and storytelling. We've seen how they've been trying to be more reflective, because we realised that Walt Disney started this company as a small enterprise in Midwestern America. These were the types of people that his audience, in order for his viability, was going to reflect. It was going to reflect the characteristics of the times. We realise now that it reflects the characteristics of a mostly progressively philosophically inclined society, and this is why we believe the models set out by the opposing team may be true in some contexts but are unrealistic to what we see here, and this is why we believe we won this debate on these principles. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and would like to invite up the third speaker of the negating thing.
When young white boys are taught that they are the people who should always be winning, that they are the people who are always right in the world, we tell you that that is what leads to actual harm for the people who are most vulnerable in this debate, which is the people who already feel isolated by society, the people who already face like structural prejudice in society. We tell you that if we're able to prove that we benefit these groups in any form of way by breaking down this barrier of having stereotypes in children's media, we're able to win this debate. A couple of things to cover in this speech. Firstly, on stereotypes, we tell you that it's incredibly important for the reasons I just gave you, because it affects the most vulnerable group. Secondly, on whether or not the Ghibli model is actually digestible or accessible to kids, and whether or not it's actually suitable for children. And finally, the impacts on children's decision making. The first thing to cover here is on stereotypes. We gave you a lot of material at first, which we then whipped at second, about why it's likely that these traditionalist Disney movie producers are likely to have structural barriers and structural prejudices that are likely to lead to stereotype. The only real response that we hear here at second and third is that stories evolve over time because there's diversification in new media, and these media companies are aligning with society. The first thing we tell you is that Disney's incentivized to keep making what worked in the past, right? They care about profit. They want to keep on making money from what people have watched in the past. Obviously, the most popular things are these traditional stories. But secondly, even if new media is more diverse, it's likely that these children still see these originals. A, because they're just really popular. Pretty much everyone has seen most of these movies. But secondly, it's more likely that your parents are probably going to agree or somewhat be more conservative with these traditionalist views. It's more likely that they're going to be showing their children these things. But thirdly, we tell you that even if if all media is more incentivized to be diverse, there's never actually enough capability to adapt these stories, due to the fact that the Disney trope is incredibly restrictive in the fact that there's only a right or wrong, there's only a black or white sort of polarized view there. We tell you that when you have Ghibli media, you have the capability to actually expand beyond these simple views. You have the capability to break down these barriers.
the next thing to do here on the point of stereotypes is just to like reiterate all the material that we've given you about why it's likely that these stereotypes are likely to exist, because I don't think we got enough responses here. Firstly, we told that Disney is just like a really old company, and so it's likely that these like stories are based on the views that were common in the past. We just told you that like Disney's like widely known to be like a company that like exercises prejudice, and so at the end of this then, what are the actual harms of portraying these stereotypes? We told that like a white kid now thinks that like his people, or people that look like him in the media that he watches every day, are the ones that are in the right. They're the ones who are like saving the world. He probably thinks that like that's gonna like translate into reality, because obviously these kids like struggle to like differentiate between what they're watching every day and like what they're like what actually reflects in their society. So even if like we're not getting full-blown racist obviously as adults, all it takes is one racially motivated remark from a kid like to an already like vulnerable person who feels isolated in society. We show that's what leads to these people feeling further isolated. It's what makes these like black or or like black people or women feel like all they're bound for is just being the bad guy, that they can never feel like they can make positive changes. No, we gave you material about why the Ghibli model is more accessible, because it focuses more on like small changes rather than having this incentive to be on such a big thing. That's more accessible to people. We actually get more positive change in our world. The second thing to cover is whether or not the Ghibli model is actually digestible. We hear from the other side that like this like idea of compromise is really intangible, it doesn't really happen in life, and therefore it's confusing and disturbing to these kids. The first thing we tell you is that it's just not super complex to understand that the bad guy had a backstory that dictated his actions. When you have the Disney model where like no information or no backstory is given about like these bad characters, you assume that they're just like naturally the bad guy. We tell you that like as soon as we give you like reasons in the Ghibli model as to why these people may have made their actions, like that's just not super difficult to understand. It's literally being shown to you in the movie. Note that media is still incentivized to make these movies digestible to children, because obviously they care about actually like selling their stuff. So I think like it's just not going to be like super complex philosophical thoughts. Secondly though, we tell you it's more confusing to a kid when they're exposed to this polarized view of right or wrong, but the next day go to the playground to see that like kids are fighting, but you can't decide which one's like in the right or like which one's correct, because both have like moral reasonability, because that's how the real world works. It's actually easier to see like Ghibli models of media reflected in society. We tell you that is where we see more actual change, that's where we see more digestibility. But thirdly, we tell you that even if the Ghibli model is actually confusing to kids, even if we take them at their best case, we tell you that like these children are just inherently curious, right? They're learning about the world around them. They're young. They care about like learning new things and understanding how like everything that happens around them works. At our worst case, kids still develop their critical thinking skills through at least trying to understand these plots, having been exposed to enough of these like complex, confusing plots. You're eventually going to develop your critical thinking. You're going to be able to understand several perspectives and viewpoints to an issue. That's where we lead to people actually making better decisions. That's where we lead to people being more open and more like caring of those around them. That's when we lead to people like looking into perspectives. Another thing to note here that I think has absolutely no weight in this debate is that like the Disney model sells better. Firstly, there was no real mechanism. It's just like all we hear is that it's just more common. That's literally what our case is trying to prove, that it would have been more beneficial if the Ghibli was more common. Secondly, we tell you that the Ghibli actually sells better because it's less cliche. It's more interesting to see like modern and diverse plots rather than just like basically the same thing with different characters. But thirdly, we tell you this point just doesn't matter. Molding children's worldview matters far more than Disney's profit margin. You don't need to weigh this point at all in this debate. The last thing to cover here is on the actual impact to children's decision making. We hear from AF that like children need to be taught the difference between right and wrong, and that's like really important in society. Firstly, we tell you there's just no such black and white truth to good and bad in real life. We tell you that perpetuates narratives that really aren't true to like when these kids go out into the real world. Kids then take these views into their lives. They start like applying harsh and unrealistic things into like their decisions with their friends and their siblings. We show that's never something that we can support. We want people to be more understanding of others. But secondly, we tell you that Ghibli media gives children a realistic view of how decisions and judgments are actually made. The second thing we hear is that like children should know that that the good people always win. Firstly, we told that it's just not true that good always wins. Young children are taught by media that if they think they're right, they should win, and we tell you that's incredibly harmful. The Ghibli model promotes fairness and compromise. This looks like kids being willing to share with their sibling and listen to their parents when they're told to share because they see their favorite characters doing it in the story. We tell you that is actually what's beneficial to children. We lead to just generally better people who are actually willing to be kinder on our side. The impact here is that kids base their foundation partly on what they see on TV, right? Because it's just such a big part of their life. We get children who are more likely to take other viewpoints into account before making judgments, before making actions. Proud to negate.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Now, in ancient and whimsical debating tradition, we are going to flip the speaking order, so I would like to invite up the reply speaker of the negating team.
The two opposing harms in this debate is that they tell us that you're going to have confused kids when they watch TV, whereas our harms are the fact that kids are going to be pushed to thinking discriminatory ideals or being pushed to thinking that there is an objective right in this world. I think these harms are far more significant than just kids being slightly confused when they see a philosophical idea. Firstly, on stereotypes in Disney optimism, and then secondly, on the subjectivity influence on the children, which is what they're trying to win on. Firstly, on stereotypes then. We pushed this down the line, and here's what we heard from Side Affirming. They told us that Disney has changed to include more depictions of good and bad and more diverse casts because they want to be progressive. Note this is not true because, for the example of The Little Mermaid, where they use a black actor as the Little Mermaid and where she used to be white, I think people stopped watching this because they wanted to protest the diversity casting or because they were inherently racist. So I think Disney doesn't actually have as big as an incentive as they tell you. We also told you that the most popular narratives that they see are Snow White, Pocahontas, Frozen, and The Lion King, because these are the most popular Disney productions, and this is what parents also want their kids to watch because this is what they grew up in, right? And then second, I think even in our worst case where you believe all the material still stands on our side on the fact that more people are likely to watch these ones that have the harmful stereotypes, who have the really distinct good and bad. I think this is the most important clash in this debate because the harms we gave you, how it embeds racial and gender associations in children, is enough to show the huge impacts on the vulnerable minorities who are portrayed as horrible in the mass media. This looks like children calling other children names like Ursula or a witch, putting these kids as bad characters in lunchtime plays. These are the low-level harms that can be exacerbated by racist parents or the racist society. I think we win this debate if we can even just prove these low-level impacts because they are really significant in the fact that these children are very vulnerable within school. They're vulnerable in a society where maybe their parents immigrated to this society. Secondly then, on the subjectivity and the influence it has on the children. The first thing that they pushed is that there's subjectivity and the compromise can be disturbing to these children. We pushed throughout that firstly the Gib has the same profit incentive as what they told us about Disney. They have that incentive to make it digestible, so it's not going to be these huge Marxist ideals. They're just going to be small little friendship things between Strawberry Shortcake and her other friends. We think this is the stuff you actually see, that kids will actually see from Ghibli productions. This allows them to have some sort of idea of what they can do in their daily life instead of just saying, oh, you have to be this massive, huge, amazing person to be doing a good action. Secondly, they told you that these young children don't have critical thinking skills, and this was a big part of their characterization. We told you that firstly, 2-year-olds, really, really young children, can't even understand the language of which the TV show is being shown, right? So they're probably not getting anything. We're talking about those 7, 8-year-olds, or those ones ones who are in school or in preschool who can actually digest this information. They go to school, at least preschool, they are literally learning maths, literally learning how to write. They have critical thinking skills in which they go to public places. We think they can think for themselves and be able to distinguish these like low level, like slightly morally ambiguous ideas. Now, thirdly, on the impact on the children's good actions, the main push we heard from them is that they don't really do good actions on our side because they don't know what a good action is. We showed you that because they have critical thinking skills, they can do this. But secondly, we showed you that they're more likely to do this in the first place because a good action, they're more likely to seek out good actions because good actions aren't portrayed as saving someone's life.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now to close us out for round 5, I would like to invite up the reply speaker of the affirming team.
Digestibility is the crux of this argument. It is the true meat in the sauce, right? To be able to prove let's take a step back here. If we can prove what side is able to digest their version of optimism better, means they'll be able to get the rewards that they so deserve, right? So the affirming side here have clearly talked about that we are able to digest this good model of Disney optimism with regards to that. It is being able to be seen, and we've mechanized this through the point of the social learning theory and the audience expectations with regards to people who watch the media and see it consume in. This also comes to a lot of economic benefits, which Natalie talked about, and the economic benefits that we see from that. Whereas if we take a step back and kind of look at the negating side of the argument here, we can kind of see that although realistically this kind of term of Ghibli optimism is like really good and positive, it can't be good and positive for society and get all the benefits they so talk about if it simply cannot be digested by a 5-year-old, as we've talked about. It can simply not be, you simply cannot get all these benefits if the sort of type of optimism is not actually able to be ingested and we cannot see the benefits from that. So that's just kind of a brief outline of the clash points. But I also just want to come and fully bring it all together here. We've kind of talked about with regards to the fact of political and getting all these stereotypes in here, and it was a definitely main push coming from the negating side here. However, we as the affirming side have clearly been able to shut that down, and we talked about a mechanism in terms of getting these kind of high school students, and as we grow up in society, being able to change and adapt in that sort of scheme of things. I also just want to come back and just summarize the kind of benefits for the economy here, right? We see in the Ghibli model not a lot of people coming out, as we've already talked about, not a lot of people coming out and making a lot of funds because people don't want to go and watch this based on preconceived societal beliefs. Now, there are obviously these preconceived societal beliefs, and you could argue that some of them are, sure, racist, and they follow this kind of archetype of clear stereotype characters, but at the end of the day, as William on third talked about, this kind of scheme with regards to this overall reliability of the debate here. Also, gritty realism, we talked about, right? A 5-year-old should not be shown these absolute despicable kind of optimism types when, with regards, they can't even process it, let alone should be seeing information like that. Natalie at first talked about quite clearly the fact that we can see these kinds of realist ideas, and that G ratings, and I even touched on that in second with regards to G ratings, PG ratings, R13, R16 ratings, and the fact that simple young teenagers, the simple youth, aka the children of tomorrow, are not able to sort of ingest this sort of information here. Which then comes back to that overall kind of point. Which side can actually get them to digest this sort of optimism better? It is clearly the affirming side, as we have been able to prove a huge number of benefits. First of all, we've been able to prove the huge benefits with regards to the fact that one side of the house is going to clearly learn the right and wrong principles in life, because sadly at the end of the day we need to understand these right and wrong principles, because we also argued in first that these right and wrong principles are key because simply put, you cannot have a world where something is completely right and something is completely wrong, which then comes back to us, meaning that point is towards us here. I also just kind of want to briefly just touch on the fact of, with regards to this escapism, and this kind of motivation and children wanting to learn and grow. How can you inspire a child, as I referred to it second, how can you inspire a child if simply put, they are not understandably able to overcome these sort of preconceived ideas with regards to that? How are they able to jump over these hurdles in life if all they see is a negative world where it's impossible to win and you can never get over that hurdle there? Regardless of what race or society or clique of life on progressive, conservative, regardless of what part of society you come from, your gender, your ethnicity, at the end of the day, it's about learning and being able to grow as a person and being able to figure out and jump through these sort of critical thinking steps, which we also clearly won that point of regards to critical thinking, because the youth of tomorrow simply do not have the ability to think critically of these ideas. They can simply not digest the information that has been given by Ghibli optimism, which is why Disney optimism is the superior model, as we are able to digest it on the affirming side of the house. Proud to stand. Thank you.
Hi, thank the speaker for their speech, and I'd like to thank all speakers for engaging in debate. Please welcome the floor, shake hands, cross elbows, and then vacate the room.